The war in Ukraine has brought industrialized warfare back to Europe for the first time since World War II, and its impact is being felt not just in the region, but around the world. While this isn't the only recent conflict in Eastern Europe, those were small skirmishes in comparison to the titanic amount of resources and manpower being levied by both Russia and Ukraine in this current conflict. This is more than just a clash between two nations though, as a significant amount of the NATO alliance has thrown its weight into the mix. This is a clash between two major powers, Russia and the West. The conflict has been ongoing for several years now, and while NATO has not formally joined the war, it has done a lot to support Ukraine's ability to fight off the Russian invasion and even reversing the tide of the war. When the war started, Ukrainian troops were moderately armed and equipped, and the nation had no hope of properly equipping the hundreds of thousands of conscripts and volunteers that were drawn up after full mobilization. NATO quickly began to ship badly needed personal equipment such as helmets, body armor, and even uniforms. Today, the average Ukrainian infantryman is far better equipped than his Russian counterpart, all thanks to Western support. The United States, specifically, has done practically everything to fight off the Russian invasion except pull the trigger itself on the weapons it supplies to Ukraine. The vast arsenal of American reconnaissance and surveillance assets, as well as its huge intelligence apparatus, has been brought to bear on Russian forces with titanic consequences. Russian generals and senior officers are dying at an alarming rate thanks to U.S. intelligence and recon provided directly to Ukrainian forces on the ground via intelligence sharing networks. American generals even famously rejected the original Ukrainian September offensive plans and reshaped them in collaboration with their Ukrainian counterparts, leading to one of the most stunning defeats of Russian forces since the Russo-Japanese War. But the war in Ukraine has shown the world just how poorly prepared countries are for the return of industrial warfare, and France, along with other nations, is quickly taking note. The most striking lesson from the war in Ukraine is that Russia is nowhere near the military power it pretended to be. The second most striking lesson is that modern war against a near-peer adversary eats up resources at truly astonishing rates. Russian artillery, for example, is using up on average 20,000 rounds of artillery a day with a monthly average of 600,000. While most Western powers keep reserve ammunition in the millions of units, this still means that with current stockpiles, even a power like the United States could only undertake a couple of months of high-intensity combat operations before they have to start being very judicious on their usage of artillery, and that's exactly the opposite of how artillery is meant to be used. To date, Russia has lost over 1,000 tanks in the fighting, with that number spiking dramatically during the current counteroffensive by Ukraine. During this ongoing counteroffensive, Russia is estimated to be losing 10 tanks a day, an astonishing figure only made more astonishing by the fact that half these tanks are being abandoned. Ukraine, on the other hand, is losing 2 a day, still a very worrying figure for any military power, as losing 60 tanks in 1 month would be a significant number of losses for most armies. For instance, France has just over 500 tanks, so this rate of loss would equal to 12% of its tank forces every month, a completely unsustainable figure without some form of rapid replenishment. If France were losing tanks at the rate Russia is losing them, they'd be losing 20% of their force every month, going from unsustainable levels to catastrophic levels. For Ukraine, it helps that most former Russian tanks are now currently used by Ukrainian forces thanks to their ability to capture and repurpose equipment from the enemy. But the lesson for the world is clear: modern warfare is incredibly resource intensive, and even the most well-prepared nations could find themselves stretched thin in a high-intensity conflict. So, what have we learned from the war in Ukraine? Firstly, the power of industrialized warfare is back and here to stay. Secondly, modern warfare is incredibly resource-intensive, and even the most powerful nations can find themselves struggling to sustain high-intensity combat operations. And finally, the support of allies can make a massive difference in the outcome of a conflict. Let's hope that the lessons learned from the conflict in Ukraine are taken to heart by nations around the world and lead to a more peaceful future. But for now, it seems that the war in Ukraine continues to be a fierce battle between two major powers with no end in sight. And with that, we'll have to wait and see what the future holds for this ongoing conflict. Until next time, stay safe and keep learning.